right. Once again, welcome back to the Citizen Soldier Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Scott Ryan Paulson, live from Hack Studios here in Tucson, Arizona. And once again, the Rooster of Tucson is here to wake you up. Once again, every week, we are challenging dominant narratives. We are questioning authority and encourage clear, independent thinking. Because blind loyalty to any politician out there or institution or ideology is one of the quickest ways to surrender both your freedom and your ability to reason for yourself. And this show is for people who still ask questions, who refuse to be manipulated, and who understands that freedom demands awareness. And tonight, we're talking about something quietly undermining the foundation of this country, and that is the death of trust in America. And trust is something most of us take for granted until it disappears. You know, we count on our neighbors to follow basic rules, our banks to safeguard our savings, schools to properly educate our kids, and the courts to deliver real justice, and our elected officials to actually represent us. But those foundations are cracking, my friends, because millions of Americans are looking around and concluding that they can no longer believe what they're being told. And that is the reality that we face today. From ranchers out in Arizona to the truck drivers in Texas to the factory workers in Ohio and all the small business owners out in California, you know, the same uneasy sense is spreading. You know, people sense they're being played, that ordinary citizens face one set of rules while these elites operate under their own authority. You know, even if not everyone agrees on the same exact cause, you know, this widespread erosion should definitely concern everybody out there, because trust is the currency of civilization. And when it fades, cooperation is going to grow difficult, and decisions become suspect, and those institutions turn fragile. Society itself begins to destabilize. And too many assume that the corruption only plagues these unstable nations overseas. But corruption is a human constant. Wherever power gathers, my friends, temptation will follow. And the real issue isn't the existence, it's whether citizens stay alert enough to spot it and insist on accountability. Accountability demands transparency, and that transparency requires honest qualities. And, you know, every election cycle delivers those fresh promises. You know, this candidate is going to be different, you know, and this administration is going to go ahead and restore the trust, and this party is finally going to save the country. But yet the problem still lingers, my friend. You know, the argument is repeat, and distrust only deepens. You know, meanwhile, everyday Americans wear themselves out battling each other over this left-right political bullcrap and this culture shock. You know, while these other people in power remain insulated from the fallout. And most citizens, they're not seeking new tribal loyalties or fresh reasons to hate their neighbors. They simply want straight talk, real accountability, and leaders who remember that they serve the public. Because when public service turns into a ladder for personal wealth and influence, when did party loyalty start mattering more than the truth? And these aren't partisan questions. They're fundamentally American ones. And I launched this podcast because ordinary citizens possess more power than they realize. Not through money or connections, but through informed, independent thought. Because informed citizens challenge claims, they verify the facts, and refuse to treat politicians like celebrities or sports heroes. Because politicians aren't saviors, they're employees. And the moment we shift from watchdogs to fanboys and fangirls out there, the accountability evaporates. And this principle reaches far beyond politics, people. Media outlets, corporations, government agencies, law enforcement leadership, and school boards all require scrutiny. Not out of hostility, but because honest examination keeps institutions strong. And legitimate authority has nothing to fear from questions. You know, the old saying, truth fears no investigation, my friends. You know, our nation wasn't founded by those who blindly followed orders. It was built by citizens who challenged power, demanded answers, and insisted government answers to the people. That spirit still remains essential, my friends. And today, information floods in faster than ever. You know, headlines, outrage, and competing narratives bombard us constantly. And many feel overwhelmed and just simply disengaged. But when attention wanes, accountability wakens and trust erodes further. And that's why I urge every single one of you listeners out there, slow down and look past the headlines. You know, research matters for yourself, and don't surrender your worldview to social media or these politicians or these cable networks. Independent thinking is becoming rare, trust me, because everywhere you look, it's just a political dodo, left and right tug of war. And I don't know if trust in America can be fully restored, but I'm certain it won't return through blind loyalty or censorship or by treating half the country as enemies. You know, it rebuilds through transparency, accountability, and honest engagement from citizens who stay involved. And that's what being a citizen soldier means. It's not about left versus right or party lines. It's about staying vigilant, informed, and engaged, and refusing to surrender your accountability. You know, and to never give up thinking for yourself, because freedom requires participation and freedom requires awareness, and the people out there to stay awake. And once again, I'm Scott Ryan Paulson. Thank you all for listening to the Citizen Soldier podcast. And remember, my friends, think for yourself. You know, question everything. Demand accountability and protect what matters. Once again, live from Hack Studios in the dusty deserts of Tucson, Arizona. Once again, this is the Rooster of Tucson, waking people up one conversation at a time. Over and out.